All right, can you all see that? Anyone?
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right, so thank you for joining us today. This is the first of the 2020 series of the Spark Deep Dive series sessions. We are a community development organization here in Omaha, Nebraska, as most of you know. Many of you are familiar faces, and I'm glad to see you back. But for those of you who don't know us, we offer a wide range of services, including this, which is education for those who are emerging developers in our community. We have 5 sessions of this deep dive series planned for Q1 of this year. As you can see, today's session, we'll be hearing from Sarah Tichoda from NYFA, Rob Woodling from Foundations Development, and then Corey Leon from NDC. We have some other guests joining us who also have expertise in the area of LIHTC, and that would be Michelle Grimes from the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, Ryan Harris from Midwest Housing Equity Group, and Scott Fitzpatrick from MEG as well. And then we also have some of our advisory group members also on the panel today who are here just to offer their insight, and as we get to the question and answer session, just to help guide the conversation and share their input as well. We do have 4 more sessions ready to roll for the rest of the quarter, and they are listed here, and links to the registration for these are on our website. We will be offering a full 2-week Developer Academy series again in April. The dates have been set. We're going to be doing it online again, April 19th through the 30th. Applications for this will open up mid-March or mid-February and close March 5th. It'll be an online application process this time. So I hope if you have not already taken the Developer Academy course that you will put in an application and join us this April. Quick note, we are hiring. If you know anyone who's interested in part-time work, we are hiring for a strategy intern who will assist with our communications, marketing, advocacy, and research efforts for this year. So please send any great candidates our way. We would appreciate it. Just some quick Zoom etiquette rules. Please mute yourself, type your name so that we can know who is here, either into your identity or drop it into the chat box. And then this is a very informal session, but we want to maintain the speaker's train of thought. So if you could either raise your hand or use the chat feature if you have a question while they're speaking, someone will call on you so that you can ask your question when it's the right time to pause or stop. Lastly, I just wanted to thank the partners that we have for 2021. We have great partners at the table with us, both the National Development Council and Freddie Mac. And then we also have some sponsors already for our services that help us offer scholarships to those individuals who need them. That's Field Day Development, Lamper Nearson, Earhart Griffin and Associates, and Dundee Bank. So we're very grateful for their support. All right, that's all I have. I'm going to stop talking, stop sharing my screen. First up on our agenda is Sarah. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we'll let you get started.
Just flush the toilet and see if we can have it again.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Tichoda, and I am with Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. I am the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHTC, Allocation Manager. And I know that there's a varying level of knowledge with LIHTC. So on this call today, many of you know a lot, and maybe some of you are just learning. So I'm going to touch on just some few basics, but then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the Nebraska QAP, Qualified Allocation Plan process, and the application process. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go through. First, to just give you a little bit of background about the LIHTC program, it was established under the Tax Reform Act of 1986 with the key idea of privatizing some of the affordable housing industry. So you really have a public-private partnership to develop more affordable housing. The program works by providing investor equity, thus reducing the amount of debt service that is needed on a project so that lower rents can ultimately be charged to tenants. Again, it's a tax credit, so it's a dollar for dollar tax reduction, or a dollar for dollar reduction in the tax liability for the owners or the partners of the development. There are two main credits. There's the 4% and the 9% credit, which is allowed. There is the 4% for new construction with federal subsidy, and the federal subsidy would primarily be what we primarily see is tax exempt bonds, which I'm not going to go into a lot today because that's a little bit more complicated of a process. But there is good news too with the 4%. It used to be that rate was floating, and that recently has been locked to be 4%. It used to be whatever the published rate was. So it could have been 3.12 or 3.26, something less. So that's been great news that now it's locked at a flat 4%. The 4% we see most in our regular LIHTC program is the 4% credit for acquisition of existing buildings, which then are going to be substantially rehabilitated. And then what we really see the most of with our applications and in our process is the 9%, which is for new construction and rehabilitation that do not have federal subsidies. So again, not tax exempt bonds or anything like that. Basic calculations or terms involved with the calculation of tax credit is qualified basis multiplied by the applicable percentage gets your annual credit amount. So qualified basis, again, this is a very simple overview, includes development costs, less the cost of land, site preparation, and reserves, and then multiplied by the percentage of low income units or square footage. So in this example today, that I'm going to quickly show you 100% of the units are low income housing tax credit units. So you would multiply any number by 100%. And then the applicable percentage is that rate we were talking about earlier, which is the 9% or the 4% rate. So an example, and this is a very simplified example of tax credits, but you can see here we have a project that is $2 million. The eligible basis in this case is 1.6 million because we're taking the 2 million less the land, the site work, and the reserve. So it would give us that eligible basis of 1.6 million. And then to show that simple calculation, we have that 1.6 million times the 100% because we're saying that all of our building is 100% tax credit. All of the units are affordable. And then that amount would be the 9%, the applicable would be 9%. So that means you would have a credit of $144,000, which your equity then, that is $144,000 times 10 years times your equity amount would be a little over 1.2 million. And this shows that the calculation of the federal credit. Now in Nebraska, we also have a state credit. And to show how that works, it's very similar. You have your, again, the same eligible basis calculation, and you have same qualified basis calculation. And in Nebraska, the way the statute's written, you get an equal amount of federal credit or state credits as federal credits. So you had 144,000 in federal credits, and now you would also get 144,000 in state credits. The difference with the state credit is that is a 6-year credit. So instead of 10, it's 6 years. And the equity pricing is usually less. So in this example, we used what NYFA uses as our minimum amount, and that's 60 cents per 60 cents on the dollar. So you would be getting in this situation an equity amount for the state credits of $518,400. So that brings your equity amount that you have for your project to a little over 1.7 million. But our project again was $2 million. So you have a gap. What we often see for how to close that gap are permanent loans on projects. A big one is our partners with the Department of Economic Development, Michelle, who Angela mentioned earlier. There's home funds and National Housing Trust funds. They also have this year, they are working on also including community development block grant disaster recovery funds in also as a source to fill the gap. That's not quite finalized yet, but it's something that they're definitely working on. Then we also see funds from Federal Home Loan Bank of Topeka and then deferred developer fees. Those are key ways that that gap is filled. A little bit about our 2021 LIHTC allocation is we approximately have $5.4 million. The way that amount is arrived at is that it is, there's a published amount every year that tells us how much we get per capita. This year, it's approximately $2.75 per capita. And then annually, they also publish our population rates. So again, it's approximate because those numbers aren't always published until later in this year. Generally, we are oversubscribed. We typically have, we are able to provide conditional reservations to 1 out of every 3 or 4 applications that we get in. So it is a competitive process. And then a key thing to remember is that we have a joint application process with the Nebraska Department of Economic Development so that it allows you to easily apply for tax credits and then those GAP funds, home and National Housing Trust funds at the same time. So one of the most important things, and I can't stress it enough, is the qualified allocation plan. It is the plan that governs the annual distribution of the tax credit. So it is what we follow on how we distribute those credits. One of the key things you will see in our process is we have focus group meetings and public hearings. That is the participation that I really recommend that anyone who's interested in affordable housing really participates in, whether or not you have public comments yet or are ready to actively participate in the conversation. It's important to I feel personally it's important to get out there, get familiar with the conversations that are taking place within the, with the individuals who are currently using the program, because those really shape what the focus groups and the public hearings shape what our qualified allocation plan ends up being. We have just switched to a 2-year allocation plan to hopefully streamline things a little bit from year to year, so developers and individuals and the public know what to expect in a 2-year period. So there's a little bit more planning time. So again, this is a really important piece to keep an eye on our website. You can learn quite a lot from those focus groups and the public hearings. We also have meetings, NYFA and the Department of Economic Development work closely together when we're planning the application and putting together the application in the QAP. After we have our public hearing, usually there are some small changes that take place resulting from comments at that public hearing. We then recommend the qualified allocation plan to our board, and then they would approve that. And then it's sent over to the governor for approval. Once that's approved, then we can actually start the application process for the funds. To talk a little bit about what exactly is the QAP, it's our allocation plan. So it details how much money we expect to have, or how many credits we expect to have, any set asides, which I'll go over those a little bit later, any fees involved, and then program guidelines and processes. The QAP also includes our application and any exhibits. Again, it mentions that it's joint with the Department of Economic Development. And then it also includes project from beginning to end project items. So we have our carryover agreements, 10% tests, and the final cost cert, which are all kind of milestones throughout your project that are required by code to be met. The set-asides that I mentioned earlier, our largest set-aside is our Crane set-aside, and that is 33% of our total annual allocation. So 33% of that 5.4 million. And I'll touch on really what Crane is later, but it is a process that is non-competitive for difficult to develop projects. And I'll go over the details with that a little bit more. One set aside that is required by Section 42 is that at least 10% of our total allocation must be set aside for nonprofit organizations or nonprofit sponsors. And then the other one that we have that we do our best to try to stick to is our metro non-metro split. So 50% of we try to do 50% to metro areas, which would be Lincoln, MSA, which would be MSA is metropolitan statistical areas, and that would be Lancaster County and Seward County, and then Omaha MSA, which is Cass, Douglas, Sarpy, Saunders, and Washington, and then South Sioux, which is Dakota and Dixon County. And we try our best. Overall, we typically can do a pretty good job at 50-50 split in that area, but some years it's heavy more with the metro, and some areas it's a little bit more heavy on non-metro. So our application overview, we do have an online funding application where you fill out all of your information and submit it online. We have 2 rounds, and this is for this year. Again, every year can change because of we look at that qualified allocation plan. So when I'm talking about anything, it's what it is this year. And again, that's why that qualified allocation plan focus group and public hearing is so important to participate in, because it could change next year. We have 2 rounds. Of those 2 rounds, each has a threshold and then a final round. We have a scoring team that includes NYFA, the Department of Economic Development, and then we have our legal counsel, QTAC Rock, that takes place, that participates and provides us guidance on certain legal documents that, if we have questions on a, an option to purchase or something like that, we have them there to help us and assist with any of those legal questions. And then we do an individual and a consensus scoring. So each person on the scoring team individually does scoring, then we come together and meet to go over those scores. And we have to agree before a score can be given. So sometimes one of us will catch something that someone else didn't. So that's why we have a robust team to make sure that we are catching everything we can and being consistent through our process. Basic scoring criteria, there's threshold items, which are those that are required. If you don't meet those threshold items, then you are not eligible for a conditional reservation. There's other selection criteria, which are basically those points categories and those things that sort of enrich a project. And I'll go over these more in detail on the next slides. And then both NYFA and the Department of Economic Development have items that they look at. So the application process, I mentioned earlier, we have a threshold process. That would be any first deadline we have is a threshold deadline. It's optional. You do not have to participate in that. But if you do, there is additional points that you can be eligible for, which in this process, every point's important. So threshold, just for submitting a threshold application on the threshold application date, you receive 1 additional point on your final scoring. If you get everything perfectly right and everything, you meet all your threshold items at that time, then you get 2 points. So it's 1 or 2 points might not sound like that much, but it can make a significant difference. And the other great thing is, let's say you submit and you miss some things. That's not a big deal. The whole point of the threshold process is we're able to share feedback to let you know what you may need to change or improve for your final application, so that you're able to meet threshold at your final, at the final review. So again, then the last part is the final review, and you must meet threshold requirements before it can be considered for allocation. And then again, we review points that can be awarded for specific items in the application, and I'll kind of go over some of those here next. So the key threshold items, the threshold items are important because they're ones that show the basics of your project and show that you would be ready to proceed. So one of the most important things, and I'm sure many of you have already heard about the low income units. That's important. So there's minimum restrictions. 20% of units at 20% of the units at 50% or below area median income. That would be a minimum. The example I used was 100%, but the minimum in that case, if you chose that, would be 20%. And then the next is 40 at 60% of area median income. And then there's a new one that's income averaging, which allows you to go up to have some units that go up to 80% of area median income, but it must average back to 60%. So that's something you have to have in place when you're doing your threshold, the threshold scoring. Unit design, site information, site control showing that you do have a commitment for the land or the building site. Zoning, to make sure that zoning's in place or can be, you can get zoning within the period of time needed, which we say 180 days. And then utilities. Are utilities available to the site you're looking at, and are they adequate? Another thing is equity and financing commitments. Do you have all that in place, and will you be ready? Do you have someone who's willing to, a syndicator to buy the credits, and do you have someone that can help provide the loan for your permanent financing and your construction financing? Financial feasibility and underwriting, again, we look at that to make sure that the project can be feasible for longer than, for the life of the project. These all have a minimum of a 30-year affordability period. So it has to show that it can be feasible. And then market demand, or what you're wanting to build, is there a market for that in the area? So those were the threshold items that are you have to meet. Now, the other selection criteria where you can gain additional points for the competitive process. So one of them, we look at quality of design, amenities, and I don't mean like a pool or something like that, but I do mean, amenities where you may have a playground, or you may have a garden space or something like that that would enrich the residents' lives at their home. Developer and property management qualifications we look at. Supportive services, which again are things that can assist the resident. It can be something as simple as having, we have a list of items. It can be something as simple as having annual cleanup events where you bring in a large roll-off dumpster so that people can, throw out old things, or as something like offering financial literacy classes or things like that. Then we also talk about affordability period in those selections. There's a minimum of 30 years, but you can get additional points if you commit to a longer affordability period. And the key thing is that each of these sections are detailed out in the application. So if you look at our application online, you can read through each section and exactly what is needed for those sections. The NYFA and the DED scoring criteria, one of the focuses is rent targeting, which means that we are just wanting to have those rents a little bit lower than what they could be. So, so even though they could be, let's say, up to 60% for a household that earns affordable to a household that earns at 60% AMI or lower, we would like to see, we incentivize targeting those rents a little bit lower. So that's, again, an important point piece in the competitive process. Where you can earn 3 points if you have at least 10% of the total units in the project that have gross rents targeted to households below 40%. Now, if you've got a project that's 40%, 60%, so that max is 60, they can still earn up to 60%, but that rent just has to be targeted at 40%. And then there's 2 points if at least 40% of the total units have gross rents targeted at 50% or below. And then another large piece is the efficient housing production. There's a lot of applications. And so what we're looking for here is that there's an efficient use of the tax credits. So we take a look at 3 areas, which is cost per bedroom, cost per square foot, and cost per LIHTC occupant. And those total up to 6 points. And that there are some examples on our website that get deeper into how that's calculated. It's a little bit too much to cover today, but it's something that definitely, as you pursue this, feel free to reach out and we can get into that a little bit deeper. So what happens next? You've filled out the application, you've submitted the application. Our scoring teams score the applications and then they're ranked based on total score. We submit those to our programs committee, which is a makeup of our board. And then they make an official recommendation of conditional reservations to our board, and then the board would approve those recommendations. After that, there's a conditional reservation items, which are due within 90 days. And again, those are things that just reaffirm that you have financing, you have financing in place, you have your syndications in place. All of that is ready to go. Then your next things would be your carryover agreement, which is due in November of the year of any conditional reservation. And then the 10% test, which is due the next year, which is a required process that just indicates that you are proceeding with your project and you've met at least 10% of the requirements.
Hey, Sarah.
Finally, oh, go ahead.
We have a question in the chat box. Jose, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, definitely. Sarah, thank you so much for your presentation. I think maybe you answered it, but my question was, when you were talking about the equity and the financing part of the application, I know that's because the application is competitive and sometimes difficult to complete. Some proposals have maybe some ambiguity when they say maybe once we get these tax credits, we'll be good to go, we'll be ready to go. I was wondering if you had any kind of insight into what the difference between kind of an excellent application on the equity and financing side and maybe like just about to get there application, so that way we can kind of understand those differences.
Sure.
And I can re-explain, yeah.
Yeah, so really it's pretty straightforward in our application. If you have financing in place and you have a firm commitment, which means, and we have forms actually that your lender would fill out or your syndicator would fill out. There's basically two options. Either you have a firm commitment or you just have interest. So if you have a firm commitment, that is the, I guess, would be the excellent type thing. That would be where it shows that you have both the lender has signed off and says, we will do this. And then the interest is just, we are interested in doing this, but we're not quite to that firm commitment part yet. So that's what we look at that point. And then, I mean, as far as the syndication point, there are minimums. So it's not really competitive in, like, if you get better pricing or anything like that. In the state credit, there is a minimum. So if you do not meet that minimum of at least 60 cents per state credit, then you do not get a point in that area. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. That clarifies a lot. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. So the final allocation process is when you actually get the credits. Everything until that point, you conditionally have received the credits. We call it a conditional reservation. The final allocation occurs when you have all of your development costs certified, and the final eligible basis is determined. We do our process where we do our final allocation amount determined just to make sure that we are not giving too many credits to a project, that what was in your application is what you've actually done. Then a land use restriction agreement is filed on the project, which again follows that. It follows the land so that it's what secures and guarantees that you will follow what you agreed to in the application. So if you're going to have 100% of 30 units affordable, that's what's in that agreement, and that stays with the property for the 30 or 45 years, whatever you agree to. And then finally, the actual allocation occurs when you get the 8609s. The 8609 is kind of that key component. That's what you send to the IRS. So it's the key part. And you also, at that same time, would get 8609Ns, which is for the state credit. So after that, you go into our compliance monitoring process. The initial compliance period is 15 years, and then the extended use period is at least 15, but can be an additional 30 years beyond that initial 15. Year one, initial site inspection by NYFA. Things have been kind of a little crazy with COVID, so we haven't been able to get out on sites, but a typical year one, you would get to visit our compliance staff in person. They'd come out, they'd take a look at a property, and then they'd review your lease-up documentation. And then in the remaining compliance period, there's an annual review of documents and then a site inspection every 3 years. Now, if there would be problems or issues, you might get to visit NYFA. NYFA people might visit you a little bit more, but typically, in most cases, that doesn't occur. It's every 3 years. We've been lucky to have a lot of really great owners and property managers that take really good care of their projects and manage everything really well. So there are some creative components to the low-income housing tax credit program. The Crown program, which is it's kind of confusing because it says Crown program. It's not really a separate program or a separate set aside. It's just a tool. And actually, Rob, I'm not sure what Rob Woodling's going to mention, but he's used built Crown projects several times. It's part of our it's part of our competitive process. But what it stands for credits to own, which basically becomes where you can have tenant ownership. So after 15 years, you build this home, and after 15 years, that tenant has the opportunity to buy the home. It works really well for infill housing, subdivisions. We see it a lot in rural communities. And there's a lot of things that tie with that, as far as oftentimes there's ongoing education for tenants. there is a fund set up where you're putting so much money into escrow every month to that will eventually assist with the homeowner purchasing that home, or with the renter eventually becoming a homeowner and purchasing that home. And then the final piece that I mentioned earlier, which is a set aside, is CRANE. And that stands for Collaborative Resource Allocation for Nebraska. This is not a competitive process. It is a process that can take a long time. But once you're in the process, and as long as you continue following the steps and working towards, getting all your items in and getting complete, once you're approved and you do that, you would eventually get an allocation. It can just take time because these are difficult to develop programs, projects, and there are only certain projects that are eligible. So housing for special populations, such as teenagers aging out of foster care. So, those young adults who are aging out of foster care and don't really have anywhere to go. We've got those for disabilities or substance abuse issues. So it's housing for those special populations. Tribal land deals or those developed by a tribe can be included in CRANE. Adaptive reuse of a non-residential building. One of examples of that is that there was an old brewery in Hastings that was turned into apartments using several different funding sources. So it was a lot to put together. There were, funds from the Department of Economic Development. There were state housing, or there was historic credits. There was a lot that went into that. And that took a lot more time to get all those pieces together. Housing in response to a settlement agreement, housing located in a county that's never had an occupied low-income housing tax credit development. And then finally, reentry housing. We've heard a lot from individuals across the state that it is hard for those who are exiting the prison system to find any place to live. So it was added this year as reentry housing as one of those components that could qualify for CRANE. And that is all I really have today. My contact information is there. I'm Sarah Takota again. And then our compliance manager, if you ever want to know more about the long-term compliance, is Kelly Schultz. Her information is there, as well as our main office number. And then I can't say enough how important our website is. We are under a redesign on our website. So there may be some patients that need to be involved, but we have all of our information listed on the website. It can be hard to find. So do not hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to walk you through where to find specific documents on our site. And then the other thing that I'd like to mention is that later this year, I believe it's in March, we don't have it quite set up yet, but we do have a compliance training, which typically the compliance training gives a really good overview of low-income housing tax credit. And I recommend for anybody who's interested in affordable housing to possibly look at attending that session. It'll be online and easy to attend.
Thank you, Sarah. We did have another question come in. Would you be willing to share this presentation over email?
Oh, certainly. I'll make sure to send that over to you.
Yeah, great. And if you have any direct links for that March webinar, that would be great. And I'll email that out to all of the participants. Thank you so much.
The only other thing I would mention is that NYFA does have a Wednesday webinar that you might be interested in looking at too, that has a variety of topics. Some relate to housing, some relate more to community development, but that's another thing. And I'll make sure to share that info also.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a great overview of LIHTC for everyone in the virtual room. I did want to make some time and space just for our other guests just to introduce themselves. So much of what the Developer Academy is relationship building, and it's really hard to do in COVID. But I just wanted to make some space if Michelle or Scott or Ryan wanted to introduce themselves and maybe just say, you know, what their role with LIHTC is before we move on to Rob's presentation. Michelle, do you want to say hi? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure. My son is coming in, so sorry here. Yes, I'm Michelle Grimes, and I'm the housing specialist on the housing team with DED. And I oversee the home and national housing trust fund programs. And we do work very closely with NYFA on these LIHTC projects. And I've been in this role for about 1 year and 2 months, but I've been on the team for 3 years.
Great. Would you be willing to share your contact information in the chat box if folks have any questions for you?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Great. Scott or Ryan, do you want to say a quick hello?
Scott, I'll go first if that's okay. Hi guys, I'm Ryan Harris with Midwest Housing Equity Group, or MEG as we call it. And MEG is a tax credit syndicator. So we look to purchase the tax credits that NYFA is awarding to deals in exchange for our equity. And so pre-award, we provide technical assistance for developers to submit an application. And then post-award, we work on that project to take it up to a closing. And then I know Sarah mentioned the extended or the 15-year compliance period, and we have a separate asset management department for that. But as Scott can attest to, we're always around and answering questions on deals. Doesn't matter how old they are, and that's kind of how we're involved with the tax credit piece of it. And I guess one thing I'll add is, as Sarah kind of did a lot of discussion in detail and great presentation on that. I think, Angela, this was for Iowa and Nebraska, is that right? And so Sarah's mentioning she's talking on behalf of Nebraska projects, but there's a whole completely different allocation body, IFA, that Scott is our MEG expert on anyway. And so the rules are different, the scoring is different, you know, everything's different. And so you got to understand, I mean, there's a reason why Scott does Iowa and I do Nebraska, is because you've got to know the differences and everything. And so just kind of keep that in mind if you're looking at, potentially doing projects in both deals. And if I could take 1 second, I would say probably the biggest question I get when looking at maybe a developer of market rate projects or commercial, and they're like, oh, I want to dabble in tax credits. First of all, I don't think you can dabble in tax credits. You're either kind of all in or all out. If you're going to put in the sweat equity to learn tax credits and become an active developer, you're in, guys. And that's a good thing. But, I would just say the first question I tend to ask is, why are you in affordable housing, or why are you in tax credits? Because I really want to know if somebody's in it for the right reasons. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's not, you can make good money putting up quality projects, but it's not just about the money. It's about serving the people, the lower income families, and helping serve all people, not just market rate. And you have to have a passion for it. There's tons of additional guidelines. You have to guarantee these projects. The timelines are typically longer. And so just kind of think about, why you're getting into the space. I think it's great. Obviously, everybody here that's representing that space is chosen to be here. And so just kind of keep that in mind that, if maybe you've done, I talked to somebody the other week that they just done storage facilities, which are great, but that is kind of like asking a real estate lawyer to talk about tax. They're development, but they're completely separate subjects. So as Sarah had mentioned, get to know people, talk to people, ask questions. It's a long learning curve, but it's fun. It's amazing. I've been in here about 13 years now and don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. So anyway, Scott, sorry, I didn't want to take all your time.
No worries, Ryan. You explained a lot there, so I don't have to do as much. As Ryan said, I'm Scott Fitzpatrick. I am based in Des Moines, Iowa, and cover Iowa for us. And as he said, you have a different state agency in Iowa. It's the Iowa Finance Authority, or IFA. And IFA has a completely different personality than what NIFA does. And so it's very important to make sure, I would say this for any state, but get to know the staff at each state before you go to apply, and spend some time looking at each state's particular QAP and application processes. Just from the standpoint of there's nuances that come into play that can trip you up. Also to what Ryan said, when you're looking at things, and Jose had asked a question about capital stack earlier and whatnot, reach out to us well ahead of time and let us start talking to you about your numbers and look at them. We're always happy to do that. And we can, maybe head you off on some things that might create issues with the application that we know from just our experience working in those states, but also on things that might trip you up on syndication later. So we like to be viewed as a resource. Other than that, Ryan covered things fairly well. Oh, and in terms of what he said about dabbling in this industry, it's not for the faint of heart, and you don't get out of it once you're in it. It captures you forever. I'm going on my 20th year now, so.
Good advice. And thank you both for joining the call. If you would be so kind as to drop your contact information in the chat box, I think there might be some folks who would take you up on the offer to look at their
Will do.
numbers. Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over now to Rob Woodling with Foundations Development, and he's going to talk a little bit about his personal experience utilizing LIHTC.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, can you all see that?
We're not seeing it yet.
Okay. Let me double check here. How about that?
We can see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, thank you for inviting me, Angela. I appreciate it. My name is Rob Woodling. I'm with a company called Foundations Development, and I'm here to talk to you about a project that was actually my first project almost 14 years ago. So it's Valley Crown. And so as Sarah talked about the Crown program, well, this is an example of that. And I'll go through some examples of other projects I've done that are not Crown projects. So first, to give you a little bit about my experience, I used to work at Midwest Housing Equity Group from 2002 to 2006. I was when I left there in 2006, I left as director of asset management. And what that basically is the person responsible for overseeing the investment in the individual projects. And I was also the deputy director of Nebraska operations, which helped on some of the upfront development as well as with the asset management monitoring some of the investments. Actually the gentleman who hired me is on this call. So Thomas Judds, thank you for that. So in 2006, I left Midwest Housing Equity Group and formed Foundations Development. And since that time, I've done about $135 million in projects and 700 units that are either completely done or in construction at this point in time. And we've got another $19 million and 120 units that are have been awarded credits, and we're just working on closing with Midwest Housing Equity Group. So Valley Crown. So in 2006, Valley had a population of about 1,800. Today, it's about 2,800. It's about 10 miles northwest of Omaha. Most of the new development in Valley over the last 15 years has been high-end lake homes. Valley is in a low-lying area with a lot of sand and gravel underneath the ground. And so what sand and gravel companies will do is they'll dig a hole in the middle, take out the sand and gravel. The water table's so high, the water comes up, and next thing you know, you have $200,000 lots for lake homes. So there wasn't much affordable housing happening in Valley when this project occurred. It's got some big employers, 3M's out there, Valmont. There's also a Menards plant. Most of those employees actually don't live in Valley and they commute to Valley, whether it be from Fremont or some other smaller communities around and even potentially Omaha. So what Valley Crown is I did this in partnership with the Douglas County Housing Authority. As you can see on this particular screen right here, this building was an assisted living built by the Douglas County Housing Authority for those just on waivers. So it had no private pay. And it had quite a bit of excess land. So this darkened area is what we developed on. Part of the reason why the Douglas County Housing Authority wanted to sell some of this land is because without private pay, assisted livings are pretty challenging to operate. With just debt financing is what they use. They use tax exempt bonds on that particular deal. And so they wanted to use some funds from the land to help the operations of Orchard Gardens. One other thing to note about this is a lot of Valley is below flood elevation, in the flood fringe. And so we actually had to bring in some dirt to build these properties up. So what we did is the one lot for Orchard Gardens was split into 13. So 12 lots for single family homes, and then the remaining was left for the Orchard Gardens assisted living. And as you can see in the middle of the screen here, we actually built in a new public road, paved road, brought in water and sewer and electric, cable, all utilities. So like Sarah said, the Crown program, the Credit to Own, there's some pieces to it. It really promotes home ownership in a rental environment through training. We have mandatory training classes the residents have to attend, as well as group classes and then private classes that go through everything from what's your current credit score to how are you planning on budgeting to buy a home, whether it be in this project or another home. We also have forced escrow accounts, which basically means when the residents pay their rent each month, we'll set aside $50 that goes into almost a forced savings account that grows over time that residents can use to use as a down payment on purchasing a home. Also, one of the third main component of Crown is that after the 15-year initial compliance period, these homes can be sold to the residents that are in them at a discounted price that's in the IRS code. It's basically whatever outstanding debt is left on the project plus any exit taxes for the investors is really what the purchase price ends up being for the residents. So it can be a pretty good deal because we've seen on some of these examples that these projects have quite a bit more equity than they do debt. And so that debt kind of works itself down to being a real good number for residents at the end of the 15 years. We also, in partnership with the Douglas County Housing Authority, we utilize their existing home ownership Section 8 training program and kind of use that program to just naturally transition into this project with Housing Authority. So just to give you a quick example, and these numbers would not be the same today. Construction costs are quite a bit different. Like Sarah had mentioned, there's now the addition of the state tax credit, so that the credit numbers would be different. And this project actually goes back to a time, and sorry, let me back up a step. When Sarah just talked about that 4% rate had always floated and just has recently been locked at 4%. This competitive 9% deal, that rate used to float too. So this project was actually pre the 9% lock. So you'd be able to get more equity probably in this project definitely today than you would at that time. Trust funds, we got trust funds from the Department of Economic Development from DED, Michelle's group. This number would probably be a little bit different today. I believe they're more comfortable with a $500,000 match than maximum than $600,000. So there could be some potential changes there. We had a mortgage from a local lender at that time was about $190,000. And one thing to note if you're approaching banks on these particular projects, one of your selling points to the bank is you're having $2.2 million of costs and they're only lending at the end of the day $190,000 in permanent financing. So they have a real good loan to value ratio, but also point out to them that these are CRA type of loans, which are Community Reinvestment Act. So banks, regulators judge them partially on how they invest in low-income areas or low-income communities, low-income investments. And these loans would, I think in most circumstances, qualify for that. And then also we have a managing member contribution. That's actually part of the developer fee that got rolled back into the project to make the sources of funds match the uses of funds. So we needed some city approvals. So we talked to the mayor early on in the process about rezoning. We talked about that because we thought having some access to that extra the excess housing authority land just to the west of Orchard Gardens and just to the south of what we were doing made sense. The mayor recommended against rezoning. She thought that opened up a can of worms that we didn't want to open up. And so taking her advice, we didn't do that. We kept the current zoning and we kind of made things work with what we had. We had to do a replat to go from the 1 lot to the 13 lots. We had met no real opposition in that regard. TIF. We did apply for TIF and we got to the planning board and, actually we got to the city council and we got a motion to approve the TIF, but no one would second it. So we actually got no vote even on it. The struggle with that was the year before, the city of Valley had a big increase in its mill levy to balance its budget. So we went to them at an inopportune time. And so we weren't able to get in reality, what that did is the street to the west of this isn't paved. And it has, and I'm going to actually just jet back here for a second if my computer will go fast enough. So if you can see this west street, and it has a trailer mobile home park here that I'll talk about a little later. This road is unpaved. And so what we were going to do is we were going to pave that to create some infrastructure and basically have 2 paved roads to our development instead of 1. By rejecting that TIF, the city lost that opportunity, and that today that road is still unpaved. So there was a lost opportunity for some improved infrastructure. So challenges. NIMBY, which many of you know stands for Not in My Backyard. A lot of people like the idea of affordable housing, but except when it's going to be their neighbor. So we had some NIMBY challenges. We had some floodplain challenges. We had to build up to get 1 foot above base flood elevation. And we did have some site vandalism and theft a couple times. We would get our slabs poured, which would have copper pipes sticking out of them, and someone would come along and twist them off at the top of the slab, which means you have to chip out the slab to be able to get to good copper in order to re-put the pipes up. That's expensive. That's a waste of time, and it was a challenge. So one of the biggest challenges we had, and this was actually early on talking to the mayor brought in one of the city councilmen, and the city councilman said, well, I don't know if we want those people moving in. And the mayor was very, very good and quickly said, who are those people? Could I be one of those people? And she was great. And so she really helped, I don't want to say put him in his place, but she really helped alleviate some of that. Another issue we had was the gentleman who owned the trailer court next door actually said in a public meeting, well, I don't want those people moving in. And now I don't believe in labeling those people. I don't know who he means by those people, but he'd had a trailer court that he didn't keep up real well. And so it was always ironic to me that he was complaining about how these brand new houses were going to bring in a certain element when he failed to maintain his property. Another issue that probably was the main reason why he was so vocal about this is he had a drainage pump pumping onto our lot illegally. So once we started doing construction, we found a pipe and we're like, well, where does this go to? And tracked it back to his lot that he was pumping underneath the city street over to our lot, which he had to make some adjustments on. So like I said, challenge with the TIF, the city lost an opportunity to fund some more improvements. And then one of the other arguments we hear a lot is this going to lower my property value? There's numerous studies that show that doesn't isn't the case. And you can even look at Douglas County valuations that doesn't happen. On the side note, you'll also sometimes get an argument, well, is this going to increase my property value and raise my taxes? So you'll get both sides of that arguments when talking to neighbors. My argument in discussing that about, well, if your value increases, you know, $100,000, yeah, you're going to have to pay an extra $2,500 in taxes next year, but you've also made $97,500 in wealth. So increase in property values create wealth that sometimes you need to get people focused on. So we ran into like 4 types of community members. The mayor was one of these first people, really liked the project, thought it was good for the community and supported it. Folks that didn't like the project initially, but listened and grew to like it and to see the value. Those that did not like the project initially, but listened and begrudgingly accepted it. And then there are the folks that no matter what you say, no matter what are changes you offer, they just don't want to see anything built there. So I think one of the things to combat NIMBYism and when you're talking with communities is to stress the community benefits, especially in Valley where it was a smaller community. It had a decreasing school population. So what this development did is it potentially brings in 20, 25 kids to their school district to help. So you can stress that benefit in some rural communities is, yeah, we'll bring in more students that help keep your school district viable. Another benefit to this was that since Douglas County Housing Authority was tax exempt, this put these lots on the tax roll and took them out of the tax exempt owned property. And also economic impact for local small businesses. Affordable housing, the residents in affordable housing probably aren't gonna go put $1 million in the local bank, but what they are gonna do is they're gonna spend money on gas. They're gonna spend money at the gas station. They're gonna pay city utilities. They're gonna do all those core things that are gonna create more spending in the local economy that have benefits for a lot of small businesses. Other ideas to combat NIMBYism, the first thing you have to do is, I think, communicate with the neighbors. There's nothing, and this is especially important if you're going to go to any board at the city of Omaha. If you go up to the planning board, go through your presentation, they ask for other people who support it, and then they'll ask for opponents. If you have 10 neighbors come up, then they'll ask for you to come back up, and they'll say, did you talk to the neighbors before you came here? And if you say no, they're going to say, go talk to the neighbors, come back when you do. And so they'll push it back a month. So it's always better just to communicate with the neighbors first, talk to them. It's much better to go to those boards, go to the city council and say, yes, I've talked to the neighbors. They may not like what I have to say, but I talked to them and I listened. So other part when you're communicating with those neighbors is work to educate. There's when people hear low income housing, and I try to never use that term. I always try to use the word affordable housing, but when they hear low income housing, they think the worst. So I always try and stress the affordable piece of it. Folks are in tax credit projects are paying their rent. Very few of these projects have their own subsidy. So folks are working, they have to have a job to pay to pay the rent. Now some projects, especially in the Crane projects that Sarah talked about earlier, might have some types of subsidy, but for the most part, most of these don't have a subsidy and residents are paying their own rent. Next thing is when you communicate to these neighbors and educate them and you promise them something, deliver on those promises. There's no faster way to get Omaha's a big town, but it's a small town. There's no faster way to get a bad reputation than to not deliver on what you're promising, to change design of things after you talk to the neighbors, things like that. Significantly change design. Also, the next part of that is follow through. You know, if you design a building, make it look like that building. If not, go back and talk to the neighbors again. Circle back and just say, hey, I had to make this change. Be upfront with them. And then there's also, I think, some industry responsibility. One bad apple can really cause a lot of issues for the rest of affordable housing developers. So if a developer is not doing what they say, what they promise, it can come back to all of us. So I want to just go back to the Valley schedule and kind of go from start to finish how the time frame of these. So I left Midwest Housing Equity Group in April, May 1st of 2006. So we had our first contact with the city of Valley within 45 days. From that time, it was another 3 months until we did the preliminary application that Sarah talked about earlier. And then the final application where you have the opportunity to correct any issues, that was submitted on November 3rd. Awards were announced in the middle of December. We broke ground within 4 months, so early on in the spring. We actually had our construction completed in a little over 6 months, which is incredibly fast. If you do a multifamily building, a lot of those construction timeframes will go on for a year, 15 months, 16 months, depending on the size. And we actually had all of these leased up in 45 days. And a lot of that is due to the good work of Douglas County Housing Authority, and they're working with their clients, getting them ready. So this particular project was, 18 months from start to finish, which is really, really, really fast. I've had some that have gone for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So this is best case scenario. They don't all shake out like this. So some elements of design Sarah touched on. We did some things with accessible designs. Since this is in Valley and because of that base flood elevation, we actually built up the site, and none of these sites have basements. We actually had a storm shelter over in the Orchard Gardens that folks could go to if there was ever a storm, but these are all slab on grade, and so they're all visitable. So you can get in and visit the resident of these houses if you're in a wheelchair. No steps. You have access to a restroom all on the first floor. We also worked heavily with Douglas County Housing Authority's maintenance staff on design. They had a lot of materials that they wanted to, in their past experiences, haven't worked well with them, did work well. And so we tried to incorporate the ones that worked well and not use the ones that didn't. Amenities, all the appliances are included. They all have a sprinkler system, garage openers, high efficiency HVAC systems. And one of the nice things is that a neighboring assisted living actually had a daycare built into it. And so there was an intergenerational thing where the come down and interact with the kids, and the kids can interact with the grandparents, and it was a really nice setup. Plans. So the plans were done by Alley Pointer Maquetto Architecture. So this is kind of the elevation. This is what it looked like, the finished product. Then this is part, and that's a handicap unit we just showed. And so this is the handicap kitchen. You can see in here, there's an area for someone in a wheelchair can roll under and still have workspace. The stove is a little different, that the controls are all on front, so someone in a wheelchair can access those. And there's also a switch that accesses the vent fan above. So also, and then over by the sink, there's rolling area too there that folks can, if folks are in a wheelchair, they can have rolling access to their sink. So then the second design we used was Alley Pointer Maquetto's design as well. And that's kind of what one of the finished products looked like. That was actually our groundbreaking. It's got a nice little bump out in these bedrooms up on front. This was before we got carpet, but that's kind of had a nice little picture window in the bedroom units upstairs on facing the street. A couple more designs. We were very particular about color. We wanted to try and have something a little modern to match the design, but not be too bright. And then I always put this picture in my presentations because this is why I do what I do. These folks were actually at the ribbon cutting and getting ready to move into their house. And so this is these two families' first opportunity to kind of get into a position to potentially be a homeowner. Coming from a family of renters historically, this is their first venture into getting into home ownership. And so this is kind of why I do what I do. So I just want to run through quickly the other projects I've done just to show you examples of what these can look like. They don't all have to be single family homes. This one was a single family home project, Crown in Gretna. This is a Crown project in Norfolk. Valley we just talked about. This is a Crown project up in Wayne, Nebraska. The city of Wayne had a housing shortage, and so they built their own subdivision basically. And we were 10 of there were an original 11 units in there. We were 10 of those 11. And then the entire subdivision filled out within, I think, 7-8 years. So there's a couple lots still here and there, but it really filled out. And so this is a great example of, if you build affordable housing, it doesn't mean other types of housing won't be built nearby. This was my first foray into a multifamily building. This is out on 156th and Q Street in Omaha, Millard Senior Housing. I really like this one. My family is originally from Millard back when it was 400 people back in the 40s and 50s. So this is a special one to me. Camden Creek, this was actually a foreclosed subdivision that Tier 1 had when Tier 1 went under. Great Western Bank had a vacant subdivision they didn't know a whole lot about. I actually bought that from them and finished out the subdivision. This is on 24th and Poppleton. This is actually a multifamily building with underground parking right next to Columbus Park. Heights, this is a senior housing complex on 60th and J Street here in Omaha. Northwest Senior, this was actually part of a stalled SID, Sanitary Improvement District in Omaha that had been sitting there for 14, 15 years. We came in and actually bought out the remaining part of the SID and finished it with these duplexes for seniors with no steps. Sorensen Heights, this is about 56th and Sorensen, senior multifamily building. This is another Crown project up in Wayne, did another project up there. Creek's Edge, this is a new project, is finished up in November, about 167th and Fort Street, 84 units of family housing. And then Ashland Affordable Housing Partners, this is a project that we wrapped up a couple years ago in Ashland, Nebraska, and this is actually in partnership with one of our other folks on the call that he can chime in if you'd like to add anything to that. Current projects, this one's under construction right now. This is a senior building on 14th and Castelar that's under construction. And this this Bethlehem House project is just behind that project on the same lot. This one was kind of unique. We did a land lease for each piece of it. And because we have a shared parking lot, so we couldn't replat it out with some of the zoning issues. And so this is actually going to be, this one went through Crane and will be for near homeless women that have some alcohol or drug dependency in their past that are reunited with their family through the Bethlehem House. And then this will be more of a stable place for them to be close to the Bethlehem House, but have their own independence and work towards continuing that independence. And then these are some consulting projects I worked on. I'm no longer affiliated with them, but I was the consultant on the project on 35th and Lake. Another one on 35th and Lake, Salem Village 1 and 2. Did a project with consulting for a nonprofit, Beacon Place, over in Council Bluffs. Then I've worked over in Iowa City with the nonprofit over there projects. This was a rehabilitation. This is new construction of single family homes, new construction of some townhomes. And then this is new construction of a multifamily building in Iowa City. It's called University. It's a overlay district trying to build density in Iowa City, kind of near the University of Iowa, because there's an incredible, before the pandemic, there was quite a bit of stress on the Iowa City real estate market because of student housing. And so this was an attempt to create more density and alleviate that. So there's my contact information, my phone number and email address. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And if you want to reach out to me, feel free to.
Great, Rob. That was an amazing view of all that you've done. Thanks for sharing so much with us. We've had a couple questions come in on the chat box. One came, I think, to me directly, and that was, have you had any difficulty finding investors for the 10 to 15 unit deals?
It makes it more challenging. Some of the national folks won't. It's just out of their wheelhouse. It's just the attorney's costs are about the same for a 6-unit deal as they are for a 106 unit dollar deal. And so the more equity that the investors get in, the more financial sense it makes for them. Now there will be some syndicators that will do projects on the smaller end. For example, Midwest Housing Equity Group has a long history of doing some of the smaller, tougher deals. So yeah, I mean, it takes probably a local syndicator to do something like that. Or if you have a connection with a local bank, but then you have to have a lot of experience in order to get that local bank comfortable that, you know, if they don't know direct investment and you've never done direct investment, that's going to be a challenge trying to work through that. So I would talk to a local syndicator like a MEG on something that size.
Great. That's good to hear. Looks like Jose, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Yeah, definitely. Rob, thank you so much. That was very insightful. I think one of the questions that I had, and connects to the next question as well, is just if you could speak a little bit on the differences and some of the challenges in using LIHTC funding for single family versus multifamily, and then just how you've kind of navigated both of those projects and any insight you can provide.
Sure. For me, it comes down to what does the community need? Like I'm doing a single family home project that's under construction right now in Wisner, Nebraska. So Wisner's got about 1,200 people. Wisner doesn't need a multifamily building for seniors with an elevator. Frankly, to get somebody there to service the elevator would be a challenge. So communities that are maybe further out from the Omaha Metro or Lincoln Metro radius, single family homes and duplexes are probably what that community would fit in that community better. If you're in Omaha, Lincoln, you know, maybe even Grand Island, Sioux City, there you're going to be able to get maybe folks that can, you know, handle things that multifamily buildings are going to entail, like elevators, like sprinkler systems, secured access doors. All of my multifamily buildings have a secured access door vestibule with where you can go in, buzz. Let me say all my senior projects have that. Where you go in, you buzz their unit, they can buzz you in. If that's in a community that doesn't have access to repair that, it makes it a challenge. So for me, the biggest thing is what does the community need? And then from there, you work off of that.
Great. And then I think Bridget, you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, or did you get it answered with what he just said?
Hi, Rob. How are you?
Good, Bridget.
Great presentation as usual. I really enjoy seeing the breadth of your project, so it's really great. I just was curious as you were presenting, and this question popped up this time. I don't know why not before. The difference in cost that you experience per unit as you go from different jurisdictions. So you mentioned Valley, Wayne, Nebraska, Gretna, and Omaha. Do you see a significant cost differential per unit for the owner-occupied single-family homes that you construct?
So for owner-occupied single-family homes, or I'm sorry, well, it'd be renter-occupied single-family homes.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's fine. The further away you get away from a metro area, the more the cost is going to increase.
Okay.
And I shouldn't say a metro area. Like, for example, Wayne, Nebraska has Heritage Homes up there, which is a production home builder that builds modular homes. So they have an incredible amount of skilled workers in the framing, in electrical, in plumbing, that have worked in that community. So that they have a lot of skilled labor there. Now, the project I'm doing in Wisner, which is 20 miles away, saw my cost increase incredibly from the same design I built in Wayne to Wisner, just because contractors, if they can do it in their town and don't have to drive 20 minutes, they're going to do it in their town. And so if you're not building in a community that has a lot of subcontractor labor, your costs are going to go up. For right now, also, lumber costs are incredibly high right now. Those have skyrocketed in the last 6, 7, 8 months to new levels never seen before. And so that's something to factor in too. But if you're in Omaha, you're going to have a lot more, or Lincoln, you'll have a lot more subcontractor labor to choose from, and you're going to get better pricing. Now, I will say jurisdictionally, and I'll plant this in your ear because you can talk to the planning staff, but if you want to build a multifamily building, if you cross Harrison Street into Sarpy County, you can probably build it for $3,000-4,000 less a unit. The city of Omaha has some, in my opinion, plumbing code things that need to change. For example, the city of Omaha requires cast iron for your plumbing stack in a lot of uses, which cast iron is exponentially more expensive than PVC pipe. And so there's definitely a cost issue when you cross Harrison Street that I think can be something that the city of Omaha should definitely look at. So there's those little jurisdictional things that sometimes pop up in terms of like plumbing code, electrical code too, even like main runs of, the copper, the aluminum, things like that. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. I want to take it just a little further. And I asked this question because I saw the single family homes that you had on your slide, and they're beautiful. And the 2 stories. And I know that in Omaha, sometimes we struggle with, can we continue to, at least a few years ago, allow our subrecipients to build those? In other words, do we have enough do we have enough funding to help you construct it, let alone the second mortgage that had to help pay for that home? So beautiful homes. And I'm just wondering, what is your average cost per unit in each of those districts or jurisdictions? Could you give just a quick idea?
Yeah. So I did the one up in Wisner. I did a slab on grade. No, I'm sorry, not slab on grade. It's a ranch with a basement, partially finished basement, and a 2-car garage. That one in Wisner is floating around $205,000 a unit for construction costs, which is quite a bit more than I paid 2 years earlier in Wayne, 20 miles away. In Wayne, I paid $155,000.
Wow.
Now I haven't built a single family home project in Omaha in quite some time, so I wouldn't be able to give you a good number on that. But that's kind of from a couple of years ago to now, lumber prices and 20 miles away. That's some of the cost differences I've seen recently.
I appreciate that. It just is a question I have and think about sometimes as this conversation is going on about affordable housing for the last few years, and as you said, the costs continue to increase. How do you as a developer continue to develop these homes, and who are you going to sell them to and still be able to survive and make a profit? So
I think one of the great things about NYFA's scoring system is that you're comparing apples to apples. So when all the developers submit in one round, they all should be going off of the same reasonable cost estimates. So unless somebody lowballs it, and then they're going to be in trouble later on because they're not going to be able to do the project if they lowball it that much. But once you get in there and you should be comparing, like if lumber costs are high for me, they should be high for everybody else too. So, you just have to put costs in there that make sense. And then everybody else theoretically should be doing the same thing. And that's kind of what you're being compared against in that those 6 points of comparison that Sarah talked about earlier in the application.
thank you. It just points to the importance of the tools and the incentives that are necessary to accomplish the housing that's needed.
I think we're going to move on now. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time and your story and sharing your contact information. Like I said, this is about relationship building, and I hope that our developers will reach out to you if they have some questions that don't get answered here today, since we're running shy on time. Thanks so much, Rob.
No problem.
I'm going to turn it over now to Corey Leon, who is our consultant from the National Development Council. Many of you know him, have been through the Developer Academy with him already. He is going to walk us through a case study to really show how LIHTC can impact your bottom line. And if we run out of time, We may be scheduling kind of a follow-up study hall that we, the Spark team, will run. If you're really excited about digging into spreadsheets and learning this kind of fun stuff and geek out with us. But we will get through as much with Corey as we can before noon. And go ahead and take it away, Corey.
All right. Well, thanks, Angela. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully it's going to be large enough to see. But I've put both the case study and the pro forma next to each other. So, this is a kind of a simplified case, mainly, to both show you this pro forma tool that is available to you, but also to, help make the connection between how these tools impact a project's bottom line. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to read the case study. Angela put it in the chat. So we have this is going to be a church-based or church-sponsored project in Bowling Green, Nebraska. I checked, there is no Bowling Green, Nebraska, by the way. It's one of the few states without a Bowling Green city. I think something like 30 states have a Bowling Green in it. And so we've got a church that is looking to do some affordable housing, and they've decided to do rental housing, and they're looking to make it affordable to families at 50% of area median income. So we're just dealing with one level of affordability here. It's very common that your project would have a variety of levels of affordability. You may want to do everything from deep targeting, which is 30 to 40% of AMI, to 50, 60% of AMI. And now with income averaging, you can do as high as 80% AMI as long as your average is that 60% of AMI. So, it's very rare for a 50% AMI targeted project to be able to be done without substantial government assistance, right? It's just when you have restricted rents, that's going to lower your borrowing ability, and so you end up with a very large gap without any sort of assistance. So we're going to be doing Far Better Place apartments. I hear that the design is heavenly. Boom, boom. All right, so hopefully that's the worst of my jokes during my 30 minutes here. So we're going to be providing homes for 50 families. So right away, we know that and the plans call for 21 bedroom units and 32 bedroom units. So this is our first piece of information that we can put into our pro forma. Information regarding units and what we're renting them for would go on our pro forma tab. So that there are four main tabs on this tool. The development budget is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically how much is this going to cost to take us from concept through placed in service, right? Once we place the unit in service, then we've accomplished our development budget. The next tab is the pro forma. The pro forma looks at, once we've placed it in service, how do we operate this thing for the next actually our pro forma goes for the next 41 years. The next tab is the sources of funds tab. Well, how are we going to pay for what we had to expend in our development budget? And then the tax and appreciation benefits is some detail on, particularly on the LIHTC calculations. There are some other tabs here that may be useful. There's a construction budget tab where you look at your construction uses versus your construction sources. And then there's also a construction interest calculator on this, in which you can basically chart out your expenditures by month, and it'll help you get a very accurate estimate of construction interest. So we're not going to touch the construction tabs for this simplified example, but they're there. So I mentioned that we now know how many units we're going to have. So that actually goes onto our pro forma tab near the top. And there's room here for, there's 8 different unit types. So we have 1-bedroom units. And I always like to note, if these are going to be income restricted, these are 1-bedroom units at 50% AMI. And I have 20 of those. I also have 2-bedroom units. Also at 50% AMI. And if this was a more complicated project, again, I might have, I recently did a project where there were smaller 2-bedroom units, there were medium-sized 2-bedroom units, and there were larger 2-bedroom units. So, I had to kind of, and the rents were the same for the income restricted units, the LIHTC units, but also had some market rate units in there. And so each market rate unit had a slightly different cost because you had larger units. So this can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, but for our purposes, we just have the 2 lines.
Hey, Corey, can you zoom in that spreadsheet a little bit, please?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you.
There we go. Is that better?
Much, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, especially when I'm splitting the screen, it can be sometimes a little bit hard to see. Okay, so we've got some more information about our project on the next page of the case study. We've got some details on what it's going to cost us. And so that goes on our project budget. The land acquisition is $50,000. On-site improvements are $150,000. So on-site improvements can be things like my utility taps, my landscaping, my parking lot, anything that is on my property, but not related to the building itself. Okay. That's opposed to off-site improvements. Off-site improvements are things that I may have to pay for, such as I may have to pay for the extension of water and sewer to my site. And so since it's not on my property, we consider that an off-site improvement. On-site improvements are typically eligible for the LIHTC program. Off-site improvements are typically not eligible for the LIHTC program. We've got $5.5 million in new construction. This does not reflect the rise in softwood lumber prices. It's a relatively modest number for 50 units. Oftentimes for light tech projects, the way that contracts are let, the contractor will separate general requirements, contractor overhead, contractor profit, and your state QAP more than likely has restrictions on how those are calculated. For our purposes, we're just going to assume the single construction number here. We have $275,000 of contingency. We've got a survey that we have to do. Survey is under the professional fees, as is architecture and engineering costs. We've got a real estate attorney involved. Maybe this property has some easements or something that have to be cleared off the property. The developer wants to get paid as well. So we have a $975,000 developer fee. We've got some syndication expenses. So syndication expenses are things like setting up your partnership, and so forth, of $75,000. And the way that our form is set up, you'll notice that as I put in expenses, they populate off to the right. So you'll notice that land is not eligible for depreciation. It's not eligible to be amortized. It's not eligible for the historic tax credit nor the LIHTC program, whereas on-site improvements are depreciable and are eligible for the LIHTC program. So the area to the right kind of gives you some insight into our federal tax code, really, and how these expenses will be treated. Let's see, we've got construction loan interest. Construction loan interest will be here under construction finance. So we have $200,000 of construction loan interest, a $20,000 construction loan fee. We have an appraisal that we'll have to do for $5,000. We're also going to have a permanent loan fee. So that permanent loan fee goes here under permanent finance expenses. So that's $25,000. We have some marketing expenses, right? People have to know that our new project exists. So this is the marketing that happens prior to opening. So things like our coming soon sign. Maybe we advertise in the paper for applications, things like that. Once the property is placed into service, then marketing activities become an operating expense on our pro forma tab. So again, development budget is all the expenses up to placing the building into service, and then we switch over to our pro forma. And we have an operating reserve. We have an operating reserve that goes under the reserve section for $75,000. So our total project cost is $7,770,000, and indeed that matches our casebook. Right. You'll also notice down here a couple of some ratios. So our total hard costs on this project are about $5.9 million. Our total soft costs are about $1.8 million. But, rather than, especially when we're early on in a project, we may not know exactly how much all of these soft costs are going to be. So we really want to check to see if they're within kind of a reasonable range. So in terms of the percentage soft to percentage hard, costs, we see a typical range of about 15 to 35%, and this project's right at 30%. A big reason why there's such a big range here is that not all projects take developer fees. And if your developer fee is 10 to 15% of your project, that can easily double your soft costs. So similarly with percentage soft to total project cost, we see typically 5 to 25%, and this is right at 23%. And the percentage of soft to total project costs, excluding the land acquisition, is about 23%. Sometimes, especially where land is very expensive, either land or buildings are very expensive, that can start to skew your numbers. And so I always look at that just in case. I want to look to see if maybe my acquisition is causing some problems. So let's take a look at the next information on the case, the operating budget. So we have to remember that LIHTC rents include any tenant paid utilities. That's the maximum rent includes any tenant paid utilities. So if the tenants have to pay their own utilities, then we have to use a net rent. It's the maximum rent minus the utility allowance for that type of utility. So these are already the net rents, just to simplify things. So we know that our monthly rent on the 1-bedroom is $525, and the monthly rent on our 2-bedroom is $625. Rents are going to increase at a rate of 2% a year, and operating expenses will increase 3% a year. That's pretty standard underwriting. It is probably higher than what you're actually seeing in the because of inflation. Inflation has been relatively low of late. So, but most banks and most QAPs include rent escalators and operating escalators of 2 and 3%. Whatever these are, it is the more conservative to have your rents increasing slower than operating expenses. So that's always kind of best practice. A market study indicates that vacancy should be 10% in the first year and 7% in subsequent years. So it takes us a little while to get going on our occupancy. And we have an operating budget. So there is a whole section here on commercial, but we don't have any commercial for this project, so we don't have to worry about that. There's also a spot here for other income, such as laundry facilities, parking, and so forth. So in terms of our operating expenses, we're going to do $7,000 a year in marketing. Remember, so this is post-opening, right? We're spending $30,000 in pre-opening marketing expenses, and then $7,000 thereafter. $20,000 management fee, $3,000 legal, $15,000 administrative expenses, $15,000 utilities, $20,000 maintenance, real estate taxes, usually one of the larger items, $35,000, $20,000 insurance, and we have a $15,000 per year replacement reserve deposit. So these are pretty standard categories. It's important to know the average in your community. You don't want your operating expenses to be too low, because then you're probably missing something. We also don't want our operating expenses to be too high. And probably the area that I see the most problems is real estate property taxes. Trying to estimate what real estate property taxes will be can be really tricky. A lot of states have either special programs for affordable housing, so they limit property taxes. For example, here in Michigan, we have a payment in lieu of taxes where the property taxes can be anywhere from 4 to 10% of my effective gross income. So, you know, let's say it's at the high end 10%, then I know that my real estate taxes would be about $35,000 per year. So, but if there's any controversy here, it's probably real estate property taxes that are the problem. Now, the way that the tool is set up, anything that is an unshaded box is where you can change something. If it's a shaded box, it's actually, oops, this one's not, this version is not locked.
You broke your spreadsheet, Corey.
I broke my spreadsheet, yep. Normally this would be locked. I'm surprised. I may have been, I'm not sure if the one that I sent Angela or not is locked. It's meant to be locked just so that you don't accidentally break the spreadsheet. But if you ever need to make a change in the spreadsheet, NDC is the way to unlock a spreadsheet that's locked. But anyway, down here, these are just all the calculations related to your project. And so this is basically what a pro forma would normally look like. These lines that go from row 60 to row 85 describe your net operating income. And then rows 87 through 96 talk about debt service and how much cash the project will generate. So we're not done yet, though, on our case. We have some more information to put in. So most developers can't use low-income housing tax credits themselves. They just don't have enough passive income liability to use it, and they need the money up front. So most projects involve an investor, and in this case, the investor is willing to offer 82 cents for every dollar of LIHTC. So let's take a look at this sources of funds tab. Our project has no commercial, so we don't have to pay any attention to this. We want to look at the LIHTC assumptions. The project type here is actually new construction, so we need to switch this to be a 3. We also need to switch this to be 100% LIHTC eligible, right? All of the units are 50% AMI or below. Also, this is raw land, so it's not eligible for the building acquisition. There actually has to be a building involved. And there's no indication that this project is in a bonus area. Bonus areas are either qualified census tracts or difficult to develop areas. We're told that the investor will own a 99.99% interest. That's pretty common, and that they're going to pay 82 cents for every dollar. So you'll notice that when I put that in, automatically it generated the equity based on sale price. So the investor should be willing to invest $5,545,000 into this project. It's anticipated that the development will be sold in year 16, and the cap rate at the time of sale will be 10%. So we can change this from a 15 to a 16, and the cap rate to 10%. So that's it for the investment part of the LIHTC project. Now let's look at the debt part of the LIHTC project. So we've approached First Babylonian Bank and Trust, and they're willing to make a 30-year amortization loan with a 15-year term and an interest rate of 6%, so long as the debt coverage ratio is 1.25. And we're actually not given a loan to value ratio, so we can take that out. But one important thing that we have to do on the spreadsheet is we have to tell the spreadsheet what to base the loan amount on. There's three options here. Maybe Solomon just gave us a letter that has an amount on it. Maybe he says, we're willing to lend you $1 million. Then I would put my $1 million here, and I'd change this to a 1 because I've been given a loan amount. The other option is that, especially for LIHTC projects, most banks only use the debt coverage ratio as the way that they're going to size their loan. So that requires a 2. And then the third way, which is for most market projects, is that the bank wants both a debt coverage ratio and a loan to value ratio. So First Babylonian is willing to lend $1.9 million on the project. So we've covered this. Now, the City of Bowling Green can provide up to $400,000 of an interest-only loan to the project at a rate of 3% for 16 years. Sounds good, right? But using the city money brings additional requirements that will raise project costs and increase compliance expenses. There is no such thing as a free lunch, right? And every time you add another source into the deal, you typically add complication. So yes, we could go to the City of Bowling Green because we have this small gap, but we'll talk about some alternatives to it. So let's take a look at the questions. We've entered all the pertinent information in the spreadsheet. The total development cost for Far Better Place Apartments is $7,770,000. The stabilized net operating income is actually calculated for us here on the Sources of Funds tab. It's $176,000. We can attract $1,961,000 of debt. Our cash flow in year 3 is $39,000. And assuming the project could be competitive for 9% low-income housing tax credits, how much equity is attracted? Well, our equity is $5,545,000. Is there a financing gap? Yes, $262,000 of financing gap. And then propose ways to fill any financing gap. So, as I mentioned, one way would be the City of Bowling Green dollars, but also and fairly common would be that we can take a look at our development fee. We're earning about a $975,000 developer fee. If we deferred that, so if we basically lent part of that back into the project, we could then solve our gap using a deferred developer fee. So we have 2 minutes for questions. Sorry, but
Okay.
there is an assignment 2 here, in which you take the basic model and you adjust it for to be a 4% deal.
It looks like there is one question from Jose about a healthy IRR range or cap rate. I know that's a magical question. Do you want to chime in real quick, Corey?
Sure. So This does calculate an internal rate of return, for you. It depends on the type of project that you're working on. Right now, investors seem to be willing to accept about a 5% internal rate of return, which is why pricing for LIHTCs seem to be in the, depending on your project, but somewhere between 90 cents and 94 cents on the dollar. When you start seeing like prices above $1, that is typically not a financial, the pricing is not being driven by financial considerations. It's really being driven by Community Reinvestment Act considerations, where there's maybe a lot of community reinvestment need in an area, but not a lot of projects. And so lots of banks are competing for projects. NDC runs a syndication arm. We help find investors for LIHTC projects, and we had an investor that basically told us, we'll pay any price to get a project in Chicago. They were just absolutely desperate. So when you see those above $1 prices, that's something else is going on, right? So yeah, 90 to 94 cents is probably the range that I'm seeing in most areas. So great. Any other questions? Good question there.
I'm not seeing any in the chat box, but that might just be
Okay.
because people are hungry.
That could be.
It's lunchtime here.
Yeah.
As I put in the chat box, we'll be doing another kind of study hall to work through that second half of the assignment. Corey, the Spark team will. We'll try and make bad jokes on your behalf.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
But I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of our guests today. It was a wonderful session filled with great information. We're so grateful for your time and your expertise and your talents. And to all of our participants, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a good lunch, and do check out our future sessions for Q1. And I hope to see some of you in the next Developer Academy in April. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.